He is 63 years old. He wakes up at 5:30 in the morning, not because he has to, but because something is pulling him into the garage. The car in there hasn't moved in 11 years. The engine is out. The body panels are off. There are coffee cans full of bolts organized by size, and a handwritten notebook tracking every part he still needs. His wife has stopped asking when it will be finished. His adult children have stopped joking about it, and he has stopped explaining it because he doesn't fully understand it himself. This is not a hobby. This is something older than that. To understand what is happening in that garage, you have to go back, not just to the man's past, but to a specific window in American history when cars were not transportation. They were proof. Proof that the country worked, proof that a man's labor had weight, proof that something built here in this country by hands like his father's could be the finest object in the world. In the late 1950s and into the 1960s, the automobile was the central symbol of post-war American prosperity. The highway system had just been completed, suburbs were spreading outward from every major city like ink on paper, and in those new neighborhoods, the driveway was a stage. What sat in it told your neighbors everything they needed to know about how far you had come. A family that had survived the Depression and then the war and then returned to build something, they announced that survival with chrome and horsepower and tail fins that swept upward like they were trying to touch the sky. Boys who grew up in that environment absorbed something specific. They learned that objects had dignity, that machines had character, that a well-maintained car was not vanity, it was evidence of a man who took his responsibilities seriously. Saturday mornings in those households were not for sleeping in, they were for the driveway, the oil change, the wax, the ritual of care that nobody called emotional but everyone understood as love. Those boys watched their fathers lean into engine bays the way other men leaned into conversations. The garage was where feelings went when there was nowhere else to put them. A generation of American men had come back from the Pacific or from Korea carrying things they had no language for. The car gave them something to tend to, something that responded to attention, something that, unlike a marriage or a career or a country, behaved according to rules that could be understood and controlled. Then the 1970s arrived and dismantled the entire agreement. The 1973 oil embargo was not just an economic disruption. For a generation that had tied its identity to the automobile, it was a psychological rupture. Gas lines stretched around city blocks. The muscle car, that physical expression of American confidence, was suddenly an embarrassment. Manufacturers began shrinking engines. Power ratings dropped. The cars that came out of Detroit in the mid-70s looked apologetic. They were smaller, slower, and somehow sadder, like the country had lost its nerve. At the same time, the factories that had built those original cars began closing. The Rust Belt was not a metaphor yet. It was a neighborhood. It was a father coming home early because the shift was canceled, and then the shift was canceled permanently, and then the plant was just a building with broken windows. An entire generation watched the economy that had validated their father's labor simply dissolve. The pride that had been embedded in making something physical, something real, was replaced by a service economy that didn't leave anything you could hold in your hands at the end of the day. This is the wound that the garage is still treating. When a man in his 60s pulls a 1969 fastback out of a field and begins restoring it, he is not simply fixing a car. He is returning to the last moment in his memory when the world made a certain kind of sense, when skill was legible, when patience produced a visible result, when a man who knew how to set a timing chain was a man who knew something important, and everyone around him understood that. Psychologists who study nostalgia have found that it functions differently than people assume. Most people think nostalgia is about happiness, about wanting pleasant memories back, but the research shows it is more accurately a response to discontinuity. People reach for the past most powerfully when the present feels incoherent, when the rules have changed and the new rules don't reward the same things the old rules did. Nostalgia doesn't just bring comfort, it restores a sense of self-continuity. It says there was a version of the world where you knew who you were, and that version was real. The car is a time machine built from steel and patience. But here is what almost everyone misunderstands about these men. The assumption is that they are stuck, that the restoration project is a refusal to move forward, that there is something sad about a man spending his retirement in a garage instead of traveling or spending time with grandchildren.
This interpretation is not only wrong, it is almost perfectly backwards. The restoration is not avoidance, it is integration. Many of these men spent their working lives in careers that offered no tangible product. Decades in management or logistics or sales, work that produced outcomes measured in spreadsheets and quarterly reports, work that was real but left no object behind. The restoration project is, in part, a correction. It is a man insisting in the final chapters of his working life on making something he can see and touch and point to, something that will exist in the physical world after the meeting notes have been deleted and the performance reviews have been shredded. There is also something happening with inheritance, not financial inheritance, but psychological inheritance. Many of these restorations involve a specific car from a specific year, a year that lines up almost always with a moment of particular significance. The car father drove, the car that was in the driveway the summer before everything changed, the year of a first job or a first loss, or the last summer before the draft notice arrived. The restoration is not random, it is precise, it is targeted at a moment, like surgery.
And because that moment often involves a father who never said what he meant, a father shaped by the emotional codes of mid-century American manhood, where affection was expressed through provision and maintenance and showing up, never through words, the restoration becomes a conversation that was never finished. Tightening a bolt that his father would have tightened, choosing the correct paint code that his father would have chosen, doing the work the way it was supposed to be done, because that is the only language that was ever really shared between them. The car is not the point. The conversation is the point. When the restoration is finally finished, if it is ever finished, something interesting often happens. The man does not drive it. He keeps it in the garage. He keeps it covered. Visitors who ask to see it are shown it carefully, reverently, as if it is fragile. Because it is fragile. Not mechanically. It is complete now. The conversation has been spoken as fully as it can be. To drive it would risk the dents and the chips and the slow degradation that time brings to everything. To drive it would turn it back into a car. And it was never really a car. It is easy to look at someone spending years on a project that produces nothing usable and see a man hiding from the present in the past. But that reading misses the actual logic. What looks like nostalgia on the outside is, on the inside, a form of grief work, a form of identity repair, a form of saying in the only language available, this mattered, this was real, the people who built things with their hands mattered, and something important was lost when that world ended. The man in the garage is not stuck, he is finishing something. And the car under the cover, the one that will never see a road again, is not a monument to the past. It is the closest thing he has ever found to a letter he never got to send.